Howdy, I'm Rick from the Luminary Shop, and I appreciate your checking in on this, the last video of a series on repairing, restoring, and painting this pair of Brewster carriage lamps. So now that I have these lamps the way that I want them, under the paint, I realize that once they're painted, you're not going to be able to see that. The quality of the finished job is going to represent the quality of everything that lies underneath. So I want to make that finished job as perfect as I possibly can. Now in the late 1800s, multiple coats of varnish and pigments would have been used and applied with a brush, rubbed down between each coat in order to get that smooth, glossy, mirror-like finish. The drawback to that was the lack of longevity. Every 2 to 4 years, those top coats would have had to been taken down and reapplied. We get a lot more longevity out of our modern paint products. That being said, I have to say that I particularly dislike epoxy paint for carriage lamps. Mainly because when the time comes that refinishing is necessary, epoxy is just so darn difficult to get off without damaging the underlying metal. These lamps should remain in good condition long after the finish has reached the end of its best appearance, no matter what paint I use. So the products that I do use should easily last 20 years or more. Of course, depending on how the lamps are maintained. Now, I'm not trying to say that these are the only products or methods to use. It's just that they're the ones that work the best for me. So let's take a look. For priming, I use these Omni products. This is a light gray primer surfacer, and it works really well in that it fills well and it sands easily. This is the reducer that I use. I usually mix it about 50-50. And this is the spot putty, which is really nothing more than a paste consistency of lacquer. And so I can apply that into the little imperfections and so forth and bring that surface up. What I'm trying to do with these products is level the surface, not build it up. I'm just trying to fill the voids and the low spots. And you'll see that as I apply it and then sand it off. It seems like I apply a lot more than actually remains on the surface. This is the finish paint system that I use. This is acrylic urethane. It's called Jet Black and it's made by PPG. It's a bit expensive. A quart of it runs close to $200. But I can paint maybe 20 pairs of lamps with it, so it kind of reduces down a little bit. This is the reducer that goes in it. This is the hardener. And this is the flexibilizer. I call it a plasticizer, and it just serves to make the finish much more durable when it's all said and done. Now I'm very careful to mix these components in exactly the proportions that are recommended by the manufacturer. This is what the lamps look like when they were all prepared and ready to start the painting process. So we'll get started with that. This is a universal cleaning solvent. I'll use it to wipe down the lamps and make sure that there are no impurities that will affect the paint. I'm going to make sure that no spray from my paint gun can get inside these lamps. So I'm going to block all the air holes with a little tape and fill the insides of the lamps with tissue paper just to make sure that that can't happen. Next, I'll mask off all the parts that are going to be bright brass. I use 3M green number 233 masking tape. It's flexible for masking around curves and around corners, and it has excellent adhesion without lifting the plating or paint as some masking tapes do. I make sure the edges of the tape are pressed down tightly so I don't get any paint leakage under there. Well, it's dinner time, and I had pretty much planned to give it up for the day, but as I look out the front of the shop, I see the thunder showers have moved in, the humidity is high. I better get some primer on these lamps tonight, or I'll be sorry in the morning. There's a strong ventilation fan in the paint room, and I use full coverage personal protection gear to protect me from the overspray of these paint products. Yep, I'm glad I decided to prime them last night. So now I'll use the lacquer putty for the first of several go-arounds of filling and sanding. The first sanding is with 120 grit sandpaper. I'll sand the entire lamp, the fills that I made, and the rest of it, just to kind of level things out. I forgot. I just started recently to mask off this part of the lamp. It's the part that fits into the mounting socket on the carriage. I found that with paint on here, it tends to clabber up inside there and make the lamps difficult to remove once they've been sitting there for a while. And usually this part is brass or plated brass, so we don't have to worry much about rust or corrosion. This will be the second of many go-rounds of puttying and sanding. Each one will get a little easier and a little less to fill. After letting it cure overnight, I'll sand this one off. I use a hard rubber sanding block to keep my sandpaper up on the surface and not down into the depressions in low spots. And immediately follow it with another puttying and sanding. We're getting there now. This time I'll move to 150 grit sandpaper. And a final fourth application of putty, just to get all those little tiny spots that don't show up much now, but surely will under a glossy black finish. I'll sand them down with 400 grit sandpaper this time before I put the final primer on. The lamps are just about ready for that final primer coat. And then a light sanding with 400 grit sandpaper again of that final primer coat, just to ensure a smooth and glossy finish coat. finally 2 coats of glossy black paint with 20 minutes in between. Well, it's the next morning. Let's see how it came out. I like to remove the masking 14 to 16 hours after I apply those finished coats. That way the paint is dry enough to handle and yet still plastic enough that when I remove the masking, it makes a nice clean line between the painted and unpainted parts. I'm really pleased with the finish on these lamps. It's exactly what I was trying to achieve with all that effort in priming and painting and prepping the lamps. And the last step of painting around the inside of the door edges and the door frame will finish up these fine Brewster carriage lamps. The lamps are destined to be mounted on a fully restored Brewster vis-a-vis. That's a carriage which may be owner or coachman driven, and it seats up to 6 passengers facing each other. It's typically a summer outing vehicle. Well, here they are, all done and ready to go on that beautiful Brewster carriage. And again, thanks for watching and thanks for sharing.